Happy Monday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door. You may notice, yes, I am clean-shaven. I did that over the weekend. Let me tell you something. I'll tell you more about this later on. The actual shaving process turned out to be a little harder than I thought it probably would, but nonetheless, I am clean-shaven and also pretty disappointed to find out that the old face had taken on some weight while covered in hair, but nonetheless, we're glad to have you with us for a fun show today. It's John Stinchcomb later on, Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with him. I've got some recruiting stuff that I'll touch on before we're done with today's program. A little bit on the quarterback situation as well, including one additional wrinkle to that. I guess so-called competition that you need to be paying close attention to. And we'll kind of pick up off the top today where we ended on Friday, or what we touched on Friday, that the potential impact that the front seven could make for Georgia's defense this season. One name in particular I want to highlight today. We'll do all of that. In fact, we'll start with that as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the things we said on Friday's show was that if Georgia's going to win the SEC East again, if it's going to beat Florida again, if it's going to take that first step towards what could be a national championship, then it's got to maximize the position groups where it's recruited the best in comparison to one of its biggest rivals, Florida, what we on this show would call its biggest rival, one of the national contenders that also happens to be in the SEC East, where Georgia has had a recruiting edge. You've got to make sure that it also blossoms into a talent edge on the field. And for all the Georgia fans who wonder, well, am I wrong? Is my team not as good or as much better than the Gators than I think it is, or more likely a sure thing in terms of being a true contender here in 2020? Is there a chance that I'm wrong about that? If those of us who've touted Georgia in comparison to Florida end up being wrong about that, then as I said before, the biggest reason that might come true is because some of these areas in which Georgia just seems robust with talent, maybe it doesn't all come to fruition the way that it should. I want to focus a little bit more on one group in particular. That's the front seven, the outside linebacking core in particular. I told you on Friday's show that if you go back and look at the last 4 years of Georgia recruiting in comparison to Florida, not just Dan Mullen, some of this actually predates him and goes back to the final year of Jim McElwain as Gators coach, but Georgia has signed 24 guys, either former 4 or 5-star prospects there in the front seven. Florida signed just 16. One of the places where Georgia has been the best at recruiting has been the outside linebacker spot. I've kind of half-kiddingly, half-seriously said in the past that I don't know how many programs ever have recruited those elite pass rusher style outside linebackers as well as Georgia has for the last couple of cycles. And when you go back and look at the 2018 class for a moment, you think about the tandem of Nolan Smith, the nation's number one prospect for that cycle, and Jermaine Johnson, the nation's number one junior college prospect for that cycle, as the perfect example of this. For whatever reason, we always kind of seem to mention both Smith and Johnson as a tandem because they came in together with similar player profiles, doing similar things. They both had 2.5 sacks a year ago for Georgia there as well, but they've kind of always been mentioned together. Go back to December of the year they signed with Georgia, the very first number one recruiting class for Kirby Smart. Smart even kind of talked about them together, probably because that's the way the media questioned him. But nonetheless, there's kind of always been this tandem of Smith and Johnson together as far back, as I said, December of 2018. Here is what Kirby Smart said about those pass rushers way back then.
We certainly feel like we've dropped off in our speed on the edge from the Lorenzos and Davins and Leonard Floyds of the years to be able to get Jermaine and Nolan. You know, I don't know that there's two better pass rushers in a signing class anywhere in the country when it comes to speed. Jermaine can run, Nolan can run, and these guys have got to help us disrupt quarterbacks, which we struggle with this year.
So Kirby Smart says, hey, we lost Lorenzo Carter, we lost Davin Bellamy. We're probably not as dynamic at those pass rushing spots as we've been. This is way back in 2018. So that's why you have to have a Nolan Smith. That's why you have to have a Jermaine Johnson. I think correctly he patted himself on the back, or patted the programs back, about the idea that at that time, I don't think anyone, and I think Smart's right to say this, had signed a better tandem of potential pass rushers than what Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson brought to the table. And then when you head to last spring, before the start of last season, very early on in the work that was going on during those spring practices, what these two guys had the potential of doing at Georgia was very much on display. Once again, Smith and Johnson kind of mentioned together as a tandem with each other. And one word in particular jumped out at me for the way that Smart described the work that he was already seeing from Nolan, already seeing from Jermaine Johnson way back last spring. Let's hear Kirby Smart again.
I've seen hunger out of both those guys. They don't know exactly what to do yet, but, man, they do it hard. And there's something to be said for that. We're going to play kids at University of Georgia that give effort and play hard and do the right things. And those two guys, man, they play hard. Now, they don't know what they're doing yet. That's our job. That's our job. I'm very thankful that they're here 15 practices. And, Nolan has flashed some plays. He made a hell of a hit today and a really good play. He's also flashed some, what are you doing? And Jermaine's been the same way. We call them Superman plays where you look out there and go, man, who is that guy? And you say, who is that jersey number? But then they're lost some too. So I'm fired up to coach those two guys. I'm excited at what they're going to do to the guys in front of them.
So listen, if you're a media guy like me, podcast host, streaming video, radio, there's certain words that someone like me who's probably already a little given to hyperbole as it is, they're just certain words that always get your attention more so than others. And when Smart said that, last spring, more than a year ago, the idea of, hey, we're seeing some Superman plays from Nolan Smith, some Superman plays from Jermaine Johnson. That does kind of get your attention. Now, the rest of that quote is very much in keeping with what Smart typically would say about talented freshmen. They don't know what they're doing yet, but they've got some promise. I'm excited about coaching them, getting the best out of them. But for the most part, there's good and bad. That's typically what Smart, always says about guys who kind of come with that same talent profile that Smith and Johnson brought together. But the notion of, hey, these guys have some Superman potential. Some of the stuff they do really brings the wow factor and can't wait to display that on a football field. That just gets Georgia fans' attention. That's just kind of exciting all the way around. Now, admittedly, as I said before, both Nolan and Jermaine only had 2.5 sacks on the field a year ago. That's not a bad number for first-year players into a program, but it's not necessarily Superman-type performances. Obviously, as I mentioned to start the program, if you start thinking about the very best version of Georgia keeping the gap widening between itself and Florida, getting the most out of the front seven, getting the most out of the outside linebacker spot where Georgia's recruited so well, getting more of those Superman-style plays on the field, not just briefly flashing during practice, but consistently showing up in a game, that would seem to be a big part of that. That's reason enough to start with Jermaine Johnson on today's program. However, let me kind of also take it a step further when it comes to Jermaine. One of the things that I think is interesting about him for the upcoming season is, while it's kind of always true that Johnson and Nolan Smith seem to be mentioned together a lot, because Nolan has a big personality, because he was the nation's #1 recruit coming out of high school, I think he has his own separate identity at UGA. People think of Nolan and Jermaine together because they came in together in the same class with similar player profiles, but there's also this thought of people seem to know a lot about Nolan because of just how outspoken he was as a recruit. I don't know that Jermaine Johnson yet has necessarily fully developed his individual player profile. I don't know that his personality has been put on display as much as it possibly could be, but that could be about to change because as I was kind of paying attention to social media this week, I was out running around with my family a bunch, so I wasn't super plugged in all weekend, but I was kind of looking to see what Georgia fans seem to be paying attention to, and one of the things that kind of got a lot of attention on social media from Georgia fans was a tweet from Jermaine Johnson that if you think about Jermaine maybe taking a big step forward this year, this tweet certainly gives you a potential foreshadowing of this. Let me show this on the screen for those of you watching on video, and I'll read this for the rest of our audience. Jermaine Johnson says, "It's the best shape I've ever been in. Let's pop it off." And you love that. You just love the idea of Jermaine Johnson feeling good about the physical conditioning that he's been in because we know how weird this offseason has been. And I've told you before that I don't think every player necessarily is going to respond to having been away from accountability as well as others were. Jermaine Johnson seems to feel like he was quite good at that. He seems to feel like he did a good job of taking good care of himself. And if it is true that a player that already had 2.5 sacks a year ago and already had the look of a future NFL guy when Georgia brought him in from the junior college ranks, if it's true that he's even better shape now than he has been at any point in time in his Georgia career, then the best could certainly be yet to come for Jermaine Johnson in a UGA uniform. But as they say on TV, wait, that's not all. Because there's something else about Jermaine Johnson that comes to mind for me here just for a moment. The potential motivation he could provide to the rest of his Georgia teammates as Jermaine Johnson, apparently, at least according to his own words, leads the way in terms of physical conditioning. I'm reminded back during the early days of the coronavirus lockdown that he was one of those guys that checked in on video with the challenge to the rest of his Georgia teammates to make sure they were working out hard during the entirety of this process. In fact, let me let you hear Johnson in his own words saying, hey, let's make sure we use this time the best that we possibly can. Here is Jermaine Johnson.
Hey y'all, this is Jermaine Johnson, outside linebacker, University of Georgia. We can't do nothing but, just try to stay prepared out here for when all this blow over. Hopefully it does. But yeah, hey, this is a shout out to my team, offense, defense. Any of y'all, just let this, this time to let everybody know we not just sitting around being lazy, man. We do this. We're where we at for a reason. So I just want everybody to get up, try to put a video out there, and let the world know we still here.
Jermaine Johnson says we're not sitting around here being lazy. We want to let the world know that we're doing all of this for a reason. Apparently, according to his own words, he took that idea very seriously. Georgia needs better play from its front seven. It needs more sacks. And the way that you get that collectively as a team are individual guys maximizing their top-end performance. Reasonable to expect a guy like Nolan Smith could do that because of the talent that he brings to the table. Reasonable to expect a guy like Azeez Ojulari could do that because he had 5.5 a year ago. Jermaine Johnson sometimes gets overlooked in that group, but based on the possibility that he may have been working really hard during the offseason and based on the possibility that his talent level is also already pretty high on its own, he could certainly be a player to watch for the upcoming season. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Good to have you with us. Video, including Facebook and YouTube, podcast, including Apple, Spotify, Google, the world-famous DawgNation.com, and everything else. Of course, Radio Noon on App and Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Just great to have you in the program today, and really appreciate our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. They can equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. That means this time of year when the air conditioning is running overdrive, well, you keep all of that energy inside your house. It could save you money on your bills as well. And by the way, speaking of great savings, this offer from Pella Window and Door of Georgia, another way to get some great savings, because through July 15th, you can get 10% off your entire project, or no money down, no payments, no interest for 12 months. Of course, Pella also offers the best lifetime warranty, top-of-the-line equipment, and unparalleled expertise. Also, really easy to get in touch with for a very, safe, contactless video meeting if that's what you're interested in. PellaBranch.com. Information on that, the website, once again, PellaBranch.com, or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. Good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today. It'll be John Stinchcomb coming up. We'll get a Marlowe's Tavern insider update with him. Before we do that, let me talk quarterbacks here for a moment and the expected competition between Jamie Newman. We know that involves guys like Dwan Mathis and Carson Beck. We think it might potentially involve a guy like JT Daniels if Daniels is given his eligibility waiver and he gets the immediate eligibility here at Georgia. I have touted Jamie Newman for that job, no matter what the situation looks like at Georgia. And I want to kind of dive into some more of the reasons as to why. First, let me let you hear from Smart on this. Go back to a couple of months ago, makes the appearance on the Atlanta radio station 680 The Fan. And Smart made it very clear at that time that there would be a competition, including Newman and anybody else. Didn't know about JT Daniels at the time, but this was not a job that would be handed to Newman. He would have to earn it. This is what Smart said on the Atlanta radio interview.
I don't know that you'd have a number one, to be honest with you. I mean, every kid we've ever had that grad transferred in competed and earned the job. That's all the way back to the Tyler Catalina that came in, competed for the job. Kickers we've had come in to compete for the job. So he knows that it's a competition. He knows he's got to beat guys out. That's the way it's always been. Certainly he's going to be thrust to the forefront and be given a rep, just like Stetson Bennett is, just like Dwan is, and Carson's going to be given that opportunity. So I don't ever look past it and say it's just this guy's job. He just has the most game experience, and that's the advantage he has.
So Smart obviously says the right thing there, and yet even hearing that, I do believe that Newman will be the guy, whether JT Daniels is eligible or not. I was thinking over the course of the weekend exactly why that is. One of the things that's been assumed about this upcoming season is the fact that Georgia had no spring practice, the fact that the coronavirus has made everything a little bit weird, that the full power of the Todd Monken offense might not be fully installed at any point in time this year. And I don't know if that's true or not, but let's operate on the assumption for a moment that installing a brand new offense is made more difficult by the presence of coronavirus and the absence of spring practice. So looking for easy ways to add productivity is going to be really important. And that's the one thing that Newman provides that almost no one else in the Georgia roster can at all. That's the ability to use his legs. Now, Jamie Newman, I believe, came to Georgia because he wants to fully round out his profile as a passing quarterback. But while he's doing that, Georgia can still use the dimension that Newman can provide on the ground. Because if you go back and look a year ago, it's really amazing how few yards that Georgia rushed for. Just 2,591 yards compared to 3,343 in 2018 and 3,876 yards in 2017. Georgia was a run-heavy offense a year ago. It just wasn't nearly as effective as it had been. Jamie Newman last season rushed for 574 yards. If you add that to the 2,591 that Georgia got a year ago, expecting no improvement, in other words, you're still kind of getting back a little closer to what the Georgia rushing game has typically been. However, if you say, well, Newman rushed way more at Wake Forest than he ever will at UGA, you may be right about that. So let's use 3 other SEC quarterbacks from a year ago as our guide on this. John Rice Plumlee from Ole Miss actually rushed for more than 1,000 yards a year ago to Ole Miss. I don't expect that to necessarily be in the cards for Newman here this year. I think it'd be a disaster for Georgia if it was, but nonetheless, it's at least worth considering. Kellen Mond at Texas A&M, even though Jimbo Fisher's kind of thought of as sort of a pass-happy quarterback coach, Mond himself also rushed for 500 yards a season ago. So it's not impossible for a quarterback to run for 500 yards in the SEC. But once again, maybe you say that's not exactly what Jamie Newman's called upon to do. How about Joe Burrow for the LSU offense a year ago? 368 rushing yards for him. Does that feel about right for you for a Newman here at Georgia? Maybe it's more than that. Newman's probably a more athletic quarterback. But one way or another, add the rushing game that Newman potentially brings to the table in a time in which the rest of the offensive install may be made more difficult by the coronavirus. And all of a sudden, you see just in that dimension alone an improvement for the Georgia offense. Good to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. For more on this and for a look at the Georgia offensive line battle that's about to be waged once practice begins, let's talk to John Stinchcomb as a part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Of course, it's always great to get a chance to catch up with John Stinchcomb, hopefully enjoying his summer. Hopefully all of you are enjoying your summer, and thanks for being here with us today as we do a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update right now. John, welcome into the program. Thanks for being here, and as I said before, I hope you're doing well.
Being part of the show.
Well, it's good to have you with us here there as well. I was talking about Jamie Newman before you joined us. I want to get some of that from you here in a moment. Let me also go back to the topic that I began the show with here today. And I'm always, obviously you're a former offensive lineman, so you have great expertise at that, and we'll get to that subject before we're done today. But there's also kind of an adjacent expertise I think that you have as well, because as an offensive lineman, you're blocking these front seven guys, you're blocking these would-be pass rushers. And one of the things that I began the show by talking about today is the fact that if Georgia is going to be as good as many people think it can be, myself included, if it's going to keep the gap wide between itself and Florida, the one of the things I've been kind of touting is one of the places you've got to see success are the areas which Georgia's recruited the best. And along the front seven, especially outside linebacker spot, that's an example of, I think, where you have to really see big breakout seasons. Nolan Smith was good a year ago, may need to even be better than that this upcoming season. I just spent a good bit of time talking about Jermaine Johnson, who may be in that same category. Azeez Ojulari may be a little farther along than both those guys right now. Next step with his development, I think, is also crucial as well. I guess to kind of turn this into a question, how important do you think the story of the pass rush, the story of those outside linebackers, you can mention defensive linemen with this if you want to, because guys like Trayvon Walker, a little bit different position, but similar overall profile, fits into this discussion as well. How important is the pass rush, these particular players, into the overall success story for Georgia this upcoming season in your mind?
Well, I think it moves the defense from above average. They were special this past year to elite if you're able to include and add to what you've already built in a reliable defense that offenses struggled against last year. And it starts with stopping the run. They were so proficient in it last year. I mean, other teams were struggling to even score touchdowns at all in the run game. So that's where it starts, and that's where you build, and that breeds opportunities for your pass rushers. The offenses are behind the sticks, if you will, because of your ability to stop the run and that first and second down, then you can take off the bridle and let them loose on third down and let them get after the passer. And I think, with the development of Nolan, with the progress of Aziz, I think Jermaine is probably more of a first, second, third down utility outside linebacker, defensive end. He can do it all, but probably not elite. Whereas I think Nolan and Aziz have that potential to be truly disruptive in the pass games. Guys that you can circle and other offenses are going to have to plan for in those pass situations. So you got to love the fact that there's a number of guys that have that potential. There's a lot of teams that don't. They don't have a one guy, much less 3, 4, 5 like Georgia does, that you say, man, given the right opportunity, I can see them flourishing and becoming that target every team wants in affecting the passer.
Yeah, I mean, what it comes down for me, John, is that what's going to happen when a great Georgia defense, and I think one way or another this Georgia defense probably reaches that threshold, but what happens when a great defense also faces a great offense? I think it's very difficult to stymie a great offense no matter how good you are defensively unless you're getting those negative plays. I think, unfortunately, the LSU game from a year ago is the perfect example of this. We've seen other examples there as well where whether it be referees that don't enforce the rules or just the nature of the game itself, there's a huge imbalance in favor of offense. And if you want to negate that advantage that offenses inherently seem to have, I just think you've got to have some negative plays to match the explosive plays that the best offenses are putting out there.
Well, if we're talking about facing elite teams, which that's what we want to be talking about with Georgia on an annual basis, we're talking about competing on a national scale. And I think last year's game against LSU highlighted that we can bully on some good teams, some average teams, but LSU's offense was elite last year. And if you give an elite offense time, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle the entire game. And, we had a above average to special secondary last year, and quote unquote, they were exposed. Well, a lot of that has to do with if you don't affect a passer like Joe Burrow, then you're going to be struggling.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you have 4 NFL caliber defensive backs or 5 that one day are going to be playing in the NFL. If you give an offense as powerful and as potent as LSU time to pick you apart, then it's not going to end up in your favor. So I think you have to, if you're moving up in the food chain, you have to be able to affect the passer. And that's something that is a piece that Georgia has an opportunity to improve. I think we can all agree their defense last year was really good, something that's memorable, something that's, in the Georgia history books is in the discussion for one of the best defenses that Georgia has ever fielded. But yet that one piece of affecting the passer and having that guy or couple of guys that is going to be in that quarterback space, even if it's not a sack, I don't think that materialized, especially late in the year. I think Aziz started off really hot, but it wasn't that sustained presence in the quarterback space that I think there's potential for this year.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with John Stinchcomb. We'll have more with him coming up in a moment. By the way, speaking of that, make sure you check out marlowstavern.com for a couple of reasons. First of all, dining rooms are back open, including the one probably in your neighborhood. So check out marlowstavern.com for more information on that and stop by and enjoy some of the craft cocktails, the chef-inspired food, the house-made magic that Marlowe's is known for. All of the great work done by the folks inside there to make every meal special, every get-together, a whole bunch of fun. Check that out for yourself at marlowstavern.com and find out what's going on at the tavern in your neighborhood, including a brand new summer menu on the way there as well for you to certainly enjoy. Also, many of you are still preferring to eat in your own home, to-go orders and things like that. Well, the great news is Marlowe's has been doing great takeout stuff for a long time anyway, taking it to another level with the coronavirus. Very well taken care of, very careful in terms of the preparation of your meal and the delivery. You can stop by and pick it up. They'll just do good stuff for you. So not DawgNation.com. You go to DawgNation.com as well, but go to marlowstavern.com to find out more about all the ways in which Marlowe's is continuing to serve up that house-made magic and that great food. but also take good care of you during what has been a very weird time for us over the last few months. Of course, Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with John Stinchcomb continues here. So here's the point I made a moment ago, John, before you joined us, that I think that Jamie Newman's going to be the starting quarterback for Georgia, and maybe it's a possibility that some of the folks who've assumed that the absence of spring practice, the overall, as I mentioned before, just the weirdness of the last few months, maybe that impedes the install of Todd Monken's new offense. If that's the case, John, then finding a way to insert some extra productivity in the offense through easy mechanisms is just going to be really, really important. And the dimension of Jamie Newman's legs, I think, becomes crucial there. I mean, if you go back and look at Georgia a year ago, and I gave the numbers, I think people may be shocked to find out just how ineffective the Georgia running game was last season compared to what we've kind of come to expect as the typical Kirby Smart offense. Now, maybe it's a better year for Zamir White. Maybe it's a better year for James Cook. Maybe a lot of these guys kind of step in, grow, and, develop themselves. But if you want to add just an extra jolt to that, having a quarterback that can use his legs as well as Newman can, that's a pretty easy way to find yourself some easier yards and probably some extra points, is it not?
I think it's a great addition to any offense. It's another threat that a defense has to prepare for, and Jamie did it at a high level last year at Wake. So I think any offensive coordinator would be thrilled to have a quarterback that can throw it, but also threaten a defense with his scramble ability and then just design runs. I also think this year is going to be unique. So depth is going to be key at all positions. And if you have the ability to either rotate guys in or, let's say we do start the season and there are some folks that are down for whatever reason, obviously the implications there are that I don't see how you're going to play this entire season with a roster free from any COVID effects. So to have multiple guys ready and capable, not just at the quarterback position, but across the board, I think it's going to be key. I think depth and the quality thereof is going to be influential for every team, and those that are competing for that national title at the end of the year are going to have to be able to rotate guys in and expect very little drop-off. And I'm excited about the potential that exists in not only Georgia's quarterback room, but many of their position groups.
In the time we have left, I want to focus in on something for a moment. Listen, I sort of spout hot takes for a living, and I'm not shy about giving my opinion. Every now and then, though, a subject comes up where I have to say, wow, I really don't know how this plays out. I don't have much of an intuition about this. And for me right now, Georgia at right tackle is an example of that. You can make some assumptions about guys who've either been here, like a Warren McClendon or Xavier Truss, or you can make an assumption about some of the guys coming into the program, maybe most notably a Broderick Jones. But in terms of what really happens for Georgia at right tackle, and by the way, I'm making the assumption here that Jamari Salyer is your starter at left tackle at this point in time. That seems to me, at least to be fairly apparent. But the right tackle spot's a huge mystery for me. As I said before, this position group as well as anybody that we could ever bring on this show. How would you personally handicap the race to the extent that it can be kind of prognosticated about right now?
Well, it's going to be tough because, that who knows what kind of shape these guys are in. Reported for the voluntary workouts are definitely getting the advantage there because, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to stay motivated, keep your weight where it needs to be, and prepare for the SEC competition that you've are going to be geared up to face. So, right now, if I were giving you a who's got an inside track, I would probably say it's Xavier Truss is the lead horse to be looking for. But then, McClendon and Broderick Jones, there's probably some other options there. Ben Cleveland, when he first came to Georgia, he's got the frame to potentially move out just because of the depth that we've seen on the interior. One of the reasons why Jamari Salyer is probably projected more as your left tackle, just because you feel more confident with the depth and abilities of starters with the return of Schaefer in the inside. And, obviously Trey Hill is solidified that center position, but then you got a couple other centers that maybe could kick the guard with their ability. So you've got so many pieces that because of their talent that they can flex, and you're just looking for your best five. And again, similar to the point that we were discussing with the quarterbacks, I think depth is huge. I think Georgia has shown a propensity to be willing to rotate guys in at various positions, including offensive line. Cade Mays, probably wasn't even a starter for most of the season last year, and you saw the number of reps that he got across the board. So the ability to plug and play with different faces, I think, is going to be huge, and I think it also speaks to the amount of talent that Georgia has accumulated in their ability to recruit high-level players. So, inside track probably goes to Truss, but there's such good options there that, I'm telling you, across the SEC and really this country, they would be chomping at the bit to have the level of talent, despite the uncertainty of losing 3 starters to the NFL draft. Georgia's got a bevy of players in that room that are highly capable, and I think are just waiting for their opportunity to prove the merit that their names brought once they signed the letter of intent to come to the University of Georgia.
I want to try to squeeze in 2 more issues on this topic here for a moment. On the subject of Broderick Jones, who I would say of the incoming freshmen is probably the first in line to get his real shot there. We saw back in 2017 that experience is not an insurmountable foe, or the lack of experience is not insurmountable when it comes to getting on the field early. Andrew Thomas was a summer arrival, yet became a first-year starter, and never really looked back after that. And yet, in Jones's case, he will be competing against, you mentioned Truss, you mentioned McClendon, guys like that, who've been on campus and kind of getting acclimated to life at Georgia, even if it is a new offensive line coach. I guess my question is, this is a totally speculative question, but how much does the fact that guys like Truss and McClendon, or you want to throw Owen Condon into this discussion as well, the fact that they've been here, how much does that help them against an uber-talented guy like, Broderick Jones, who just looks phenomenal and yet is stepping onto a college campus for the first time? How much does that time served in the program really matter, do you think?
I think it makes a difference. I think it makes a considerable difference because they've seen the power and speed of some of these elite outside linebackers and defensive ends, the SEC, mainly because they practiced against them on a week-in, week-out basis. For some of these guys just last season, but for a couple others, that's 2 years of facing that level of competition. And having seen Broderick's film coming out of high school, he's big, he's athletic, he moves really well. I can see why he was as highly regarded as he is. But you have to lean on the fact that these aren't scrubs we're talking about. I mean, Truss, Condon, even McClendon, they came in as highly touted in their own regard. So he's not walking into an empty space. There's not this gaping void where there's no talent already in-house. I think, if I were to make a projection, I think it's one of your veterans that gets the starting nod, but you see Broderick Jones get reps throughout the season in a rotational basis, probably in the beginning of the season, and who knows what happens by the end of the year. But I think he's a special talent, and I think there's a lot of talent in that room. But if I were just making projections, which is exactly what we do in June,
right?
I think you start with one of your veterans, and you see Broderick Jones get reps in a rotational basis.
And last thing for you, and this is coming from me totally as a fan on this, but one of the things that I've said is, if you can give me a solid left tackle, and I think that Jamari Salyer is at least solid. He may be very good, but I think he's at least solid, just given his overall, talent levels in offensive lineman. I feel pretty good about left guard, where I feel like my expected starter there is Justin Schaefer. And I think that Schaefer, part of the neck injury, was actually, probably a better player than some people realize because of how deep the overall Georgia offensive line was. I think that Trey Hill is fine at center. He may even be very good at center. For whatever reason, I think he's a player that some UGA fans have a tendency to underrate a little bit. You mentioned Ben Cleveland at right guard. I feel good about him. The point that I'm building to is this. If you can give me 4 offensive linemen that I feel good about, and one way or another, I feel more good than not about the 4 that I just mentioned, I feel like you can tolerate the unknown of the right tackle spot. I think of offensive line as a chemistry position that 4 guys can help the 5th. And if Georgia has some growing pains with a new guy at right tackle, as long as the 4 others that I mentioned have about the middle level expected season, I think that Georgia's an offensive line group can kind of still be okay, even if right tackle's a little bit of a work in progress. Am I being too optimistic by saying that?
No, and mainly because it's not going to be a position of weakness. I think you've got it's not like you're going to have to hide the right tackle spot. I don't see that playing out. I think the guys, the reason why we haven't seen them take the field is because they were behind 2 first-rounders in the NFL, and there's very little opportunity when you're behind that kind of situation. Another name that probably needs to be in the mix is Erickson, considering he started and played, I thought, pretty well in that bowl game, just like I think Jamari really solidified himself and showing that he's going to be more than capable as a starter and holding his own. That's no longer in question. Now you're talking about, how good can he be? Is he going to be somebody that you can put in some difficult situations and expect him to hold up with little or no help? So, again, I think offensive line continues to be a point of strength for Georgia, and honestly, I expect more from this group just because of the supporting staff that they're going to be surrounded by. I think, you were mentioning numbers earlier and looking at the run game, and that was they were committed to it. They just weren't super efficient with it in that 2019 season, mainly because defenses were loading the box and threatening Georgia to make a play in the air game, and for whatever reason, we weren't capable of doing that, at least not on a consistent basis. So I think all ships rise this season just because as a whole, you've got a more complete group, a better 11 taking the field, despite the fact that you lost so many guys. DeAndre Swift was one of the best backs in the SEC in recent history, and yet still wasn't able to find that space that they tried to create every game for him. And I think part of that is just with the aerial attack not being where it needed to be for Georgia last year. I don't think that's going to be the same problem, and I think you're probably going to see better opportunities for our running backs this year than what they were able to create in 2019.
John, it is always a great pleasure to speak to you. Thanks for being a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Before we let you go, I'll remind folks once again to check out marlowestavern.com. New summer menu, great fun items, special things going on at the tavern right there in your neighborhood, whether you want your food to go, eat it at home in the comfort of your familiar surroundings, or stop by and hang out and be a part of the tavern atmosphere right there in your neighborhood. Check that out online at marlowestavern.com. John, we'll look forward to speaking to you again really soon, and we just appreciate you being a part of the program.
Always a pleasure, B.A. Thanks so much, and go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I think it's very interesting to hear what you just heard from John Stinchcomb there a moment ago. And he's not the kind of person, like John makes no bones about the fact that he's a UGA stakeholder, right? He's a fan of this program. He wants it to do well. But we've heard John say critical things when he thought criticism was warranted. So this is not a guy that just kind of throws around platitudes constantly all the time. But when faced with the idea of, oh my gosh, you don't know who your right tackle is going to be, and this is if we stipulate that Jamari Sire is the left tackle, which I think is a fairly safe stipulation at the moment, John Stinchcomb says, yeah, we don't know. It may be, McClendon. It may be Broderick Jones. He mentioned Xavier Truss. It may be one of these guys. But it's not going to be a position of weakness. And I don't think John would say that unless he meant that. I think that's kind of an interesting statement to make. And, by the way, I said before that I feel pretty good about penciling in 4 starters. I'm going to put Justin Schaefer as a starter at left guard with all due respect to a guy like Warren Erickson. I'm going to put a guy like Ben Cleveland at right guard with all due respect to, whether it be, incoming freshman to the program, or a guy like Clay Webb ready for his next role in his development. Cedric Von Prawn, guys like that you might want to mention. I'm going to still pencil in my 2 guards as Cleveland if I'm Georgia, Schaefer, but the backups there, the second guys, the guys pushing for playing time, look to be pretty good overall. Right tackle's your biggest mystery, but John Stinchcomb says still don't expect it to be a weakness. Don't expect it to be a problem for Georgia. The overall depth that Matt Luke gets a chance to choose from. It sounds like John Stinchcomb thinks they'll find a good one there eventually. All right, let's run through some SEC through topics. Thought this was interesting. Cam Newton is now a member of the New England Patriots. Obviously, from where we sit in kind of the heart of SEC country, hard not to notice that Jarrett Stidham, who was expected to be the Patriot starter, has now seemingly been supplanted by another former Auburn quarterback in Newton. And, I think that the presence of Newton here in New England, all the attention that it gets, I think what it ends up being a big reminder of is just how little seemingly has happened for Auburn from a player standpoint since Newton was doing what he was doing in 2010 and Gus Malzahn was kind of leading the way there as the Auburn offensive coordinator. The Tigers still won the SEC in 2013 in Malzahn's first year as a coach, but the individual player, no big individual performance overall team-wise. Statistically, they were fine, but Nick Marshall wasn't a great quarterback. The individual names don't necessarily blossom on that. Here we are all these years later, and Gus Malzahn is still seeking to kind of find success the way that he had it with Cam Newton. Maybe Bo Nix changes that this year. It's one of the big stories, I think, in the SEC. Does Malzahn trust Chad Morris? Can Chad Morris get more out of a quarterback at Auburn than they've had since Cam Newton? Because for the most part, even Jared Stidham's numbers at Auburn were not necessarily dazzling and great. He was a great quarterback prospect, but probably not fully utilized there at Auburn. The presence of both these former Auburn quarterbacks at New England at the same time, I think it's going to kind of be interesting. The other thing I'd watch out for here is, you know how like when it was just Jamie Newman at Georgia as the newcomer transfer, everything was like praise for Newman, praise for Newman, praise for Newman. And the moment JT Daniels arrived, all of a sudden it was like people had to start praising the new thing almost as if the old thing didn't exist. There was kind of a new flavor of the month. If you go back and look at some of the NFL news that's been out there, a lot of folks, Cliff Kingsbury comes to mind, others who had some very complimentary things to say about Stidham. They thought he'd be very good in the Patriots offense. I wonder how much of that now changes to, wait till you see how good Cam Newton's going to be. Georgia fans have kind of seen some of that with their own eyes here a little bit. A couple other SEC stories to get to. The Mississippi State flag has been changed. I guess you call it the Confederate battle emblem has been taken off that. And one of the guys getting credit for helping usher in the change is Mississippi State running back Kylan Hill, who spoke out very, very explicitly on this, demanding that the flag come down, said he would not be participating in football at Mississippi State until it did, and now the flag has been changed. I think there's a takeaway, a lesson from all of this, and that's this, that if you really want to be a change agent, really for anything, on any topic, the more specific you can make the thing that you want to see changed, the better you have a chance of succeeding. The more general and broad your call for change is, I think the easier it becomes to ignore, because ultimately people don't really understand what you're asking for. But when you get hyper-specific about what it is that you want, in Hill's case saying, I want this flag to be different, and here's what I'm going to do if it doesn't, all of a sudden then it becomes a much easier conversation to have. And I do think that Hill deserves a lot of credit for really bringing this to the forefront of conversation. Is he the main reason it happened? I'm not in Mississippi. I can't say that for sure. But I think that it'll always be valuable to be very specific about the kind of change you seek if you want to be an agent for that kind of change. I think that Hill is a pretty good example of that. A couple other stories here for a moment. Marcel Brooks, former very top 100 linebacker signee at LSU, has reportedly put his name in the transfer portal. I guess the internet thinks that he might be on his way back, a little closer to home. He's from the state of Texas. This is also a guy that's not incredibly big necessarily, so he's a little different than some of the outside linebacker prospects you may see other spots in the SEC. But for an LSU team that already has a lot to replace, a bunch of guys got drafted, a lot of that you think about offensively, but defensively looking to fill some spots there too. New coordinator in Bo Pelini. I don't think the Pelini name has been talked about as much during the offseason as it could. This is a transfer that complicates matters a little bit. I don't think on the basis of, to my knowledge, Brooks was playing a decent amount for LSU a year ago. He was a signee for the 2019 class. He was a freshman a year ago. I think he was playing a decent amount. So, the idea that either LSU didn't like him or he didn't like LSU, I don't know that the playing time from a year ago is necessarily proof of that. I believe that Brooks was on the field, but looking for a new home here. So a little bit of a complicated situation there for LSU as it tries to rebuild its roster after a national championship and a huge mass exodus. And then finally, let me do this. The coronavirus stuff is out there, and it's just amazing to me, how aggressive some members of the media are in terms of really rebuking college football for even trying to come back. You see these columns of need to play the season in the spring. You even see Paul Feinbaum, who I think has just been very weird throughout this entire coronavirus time, saying that he thinks that the season may be delayed. And listen, who am I to say? Maybe that is what happened. Maybe that is where things go from here. Obviously, we're watching some states, some cities, Los Angeles, some of the stuff in Arizona, Texas, Florida's obviously gotten a lot of attention. Georgia's had record high cases. We're obviously watching that to see how it goes. Certainly not out of the woods when it comes to some of the coronavirus stuff. And yet, as I mentioned in the Friday show, I think for the most part, the one thing that it's important to understand, whether it be, the very sporting events you see, for the most part, there is seemingly national agreement. Almost all 50 states have some form of reopening happening. Some of them look a little bit different than others, but there's no total lockdown state anymore. Everyone's trying to get back to business the best that they can. College football trying to do its part there as well. But you see more positive tests come out from Clemson, things like that. It just makes people nervous. I understand the anxiety on that. One thing I don't like to see, though, is the demonization of coaches, athletic directors, conference officials, whatever else, when it comes to trying to restart. Because, frankly, I don't think college football looks that much different than the rest of the country in that regard. Let me give you a quick example. We'll move on and talk about something different. Right now, a lot of the school systems in the metro Atlanta area, parents are faced with a decision. Do you want to send your child to school for the upcoming school year? Do you want to keep them at home and do some virtual learning stuff? I think it's going to be very interesting to see the percentages of who chooses what, who chooses to stay at home, who chooses to send their kids back to school. Because I think for the most part, like at least my prediction is that you're going to see a large portion of the folks in metro Atlanta where I live, the state where I live, saying, we want something for the upcoming year that looks more normal than not. Now you can say, well, college football coaches don't care about people, they just care about college football. But are you going to say the same thing about parents if they choose to send their children back to school? There's obviously a lot of complicated stuff going on when it comes to coronavirus. I respect all of that, and frankly, I can't predict how any of this is going to end. But hopefully the temperature in terms of what is said on all sides of the issue as we try to rebuild, restart, and get back to some sense of normalcy. Would it be possible to turn the temperature down on this just a little bit? I hope so, and we'll make that your SCC through. And let me kind of shift gears here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door, and do something completely different. A couple of recruiting notes I want to bring out, and I saw some of this on social media this weekend there as well. I guess Corey Foreman, the nation's #1 prospect for the class of 2021, mentioned Georgia in his Instagram story, and there's a Twitter account that kind of got retweeted a little bit this weekend that apparently captured that image. Let's show that on the screen. So let me give you the backstory in this. By the way, this is at DogsAxe on Twitter who shared this. So Georgia put out a cool video. Trey Scott shared it himself on his social media of just kind of a nice thing about the Georgia defense. And there was one line in the video that was put on the screen that said, the most talented defense that Kirby Smart has had. And it was that still frame that Corey Foreman captured on his Instagram story. Does this make sense? And so, obviously, a lot of folks have been wondering just how in it Georgia is for the nation's #1 player. I guess being mentioned in an Instagram story with the idea of, hey, it was the most talented defense, but, maybe the best is yet to come, or however you want to read into that. Maybe there's kind of more on that front. So I guess kind of cool to see Foreman mentioning Georgia in his Instagram story, and maybe Georgia really is in the mix for Foreman here. Maybe that's more evidence of that. One more thing here. I've told you before about Hayes Fawcett. That's a guy that puts a lot of the social media edits out there for various recruits. Also had a bit of an announcement here recently. Marius Mims, the 5-star offensive lineman. The quote here is, I originally planned to announce in October, but I'm thinking about doing it earlier, possibly around August for Marius Mims. So some big news there on that front. Is that Marius Mims may be announcing sooner rather than later. Of course, all of this coming with the week ahead, where you're going to hear Dallas Turner's announcement, Tony Grimes' announcement. I don't know that Georgia fans feel great about either one of those situations there at the moment. But listen, this is all a precursor to the wild madness that's going to come once visits start taking place again, and Georgia tries to utilize its ability to host visitors well as a mechanism for kind of getting back in the business of recruiting some of these elite prospects. So I guess keep that in mind. By the way, on the PGA Tour yesterday, near miss for Brendan Todd, who really had a great season, unfortunately upended by coronavirus and everything else. But he had a chance yesterday, did not have a great Sunday. Dustin Johnson ends up winning there at the Travelers in Hartford. So almost for Brendan Todd on that front. And Gator Hater Updater, no almost on this. This delivers each and every day, 1,339 days. That's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. And on video. So we'll get this out of the way and we'll talk some Georgia football. What do you guys think about clean-shaven face? As I said before, I was shocked at how fat I was when I shaved off my beard. I think it's just part of it is just kind of, it's just hard to get used to seeing the face again. A lot of extra stuff going on down here, a little too much right here. The facial hair did a good job of covering that up. But maybe I'll grow it back at some point in time. But I decided to do this for right now. So we'll get that out of the way, and we will kind of move on and do some other things. Ro Hawkins says, and on video, you better believe that for sure. By the way, thanks to R.S. Andrews making the and on video part possible with our R.S. Andrews cool down. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. Speaking of air conditioning running overtime, if yours is not going to make it through the summer, get some peace of mind. Get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at R.S. Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Philip Jordan Wells, I should have kept the listening beard. Yeah, I probably should have. From a listening face standpoint, yeah, I probably should have, because I think it did help my listening face a little bit. That's probably true. Randy Hall says, did your wife help on the decision? So she actually ended up liking the beard better than she ever thought she would. I didn't tell her I was doing it. I wanted to just kind of surprise her with it. And so I guess she was kind of happy with that. She's sort of laid back, easygoing, sort of happy with whatever. I will tell you this, very quick story, then we'll do some Georgia football stuff here. It was harder to shave than I realized it would be. I took my clippers and I trimmed it down. I got it what I thought was very close to my, skin. I felt like, almost looked like just a few days growth. But then when I started shaving the razor, like in this area around the chin, the goatee area where it gets really thick, I could not get that stuff off. I could not get it. I had to go up and down 3, times back and forth to kind of get it all. For a while there, I was like, because I'm going and going and going, I could not get it shaved. Hugh Nash asked a good question. We mentioned offensive line depth before. He says, why don't we ever hear Clay Webb in that discussion? So I think you're going to hear Webb more. I think it's about Webb's turn. I think that Webb travels a very similar path to Jamari Salyer. Connor Riley's written about this before, that, Webb shows up as an elite recruit, but there's no chance to crack that lineup for Georgia as an offensive lineman a year ago. Just very, very difficult, to be able to do. So now you kind of move into your second year in the program, and now I think it's time to start hearing about Webb in some two deep conversations. By the way, those two deep discussions may be just as likely as guard as at center, right? We thought of Webb as a center, but Jeff Sentell reported even when he signed with UGA that he was willing to play guard, might even be, in the early stages of his time at Georgia, better off playing guard. Georgia has a lot of centers in the program. As I jokingly say, we're all centers in the eyes of the Lord, but Georgia has a lot of centers in the program. Cedric Von Prawn may be a center of the future. He may be a guard there himself. But, maybe Webb more as a guard than a center. Maybe that's a possibility. We go to YouTube here. I guess I didn't have the YouTube comments pulled up, but it's always way easier to pull up. Noah Sheldon says I should grow the beard back, keep it permanently. Maybe I will. I guess I'm just sort of experimenting. Huck Ben says the COVID cases are rapidly increasing to the point that having a season is in jeopardy. So if you want to have a season, remember Huck Ben, who we don't mind, we're happy to have him, but he essentially trolls about everything. Trolls about Florida, trolls about everything else. So if he's saying there's no season, then that's in keeping with kind of what he said before. Look, here's my thing on this. I think that the sports media, by and large, is almost out of step with even the rest of the media in terms of, in some cases, some hyper negativity about all of this. And if they were all sitting here, to the extent the media is one body, they'd say, "Oh, we're just being realistic." Maybe so, but let's just see. Let's just calm down. Let's just wait. Yes, Clemson's had a good number of positive tests, or a good number of people in quarantine, whatever else. LSU's had some of the same kind of stuff going on. We are still well before the start of the season. Health outcomes for young people on the basis of actuarial tables are still very, very, more good than bad. So, I just am not going to be panicked about any of this right now. I don't want my friends and family to get sick. I don't want any of us getting sick. People should take the precautions that have been described. We should all do that. I think around here we've constantly talked about doing your part to help keep your neighbor safe and everybody else safe. But this extent to be the loudest person in the sports media to say there should be no season, or it should be delayed, or it should be this, or it should be that. That's not what the rest of the country of really any stripe is doing right now. Just not. Whatever else. New Jack says BA needs to keep working. Listen, I hope we're all able to keep working. I really do. J Job says that the red states don't want to wear masks. So I don't want to mention the politic thing here too much, but as I said on Friday, I think if you really digged deep and looked at what's going on, whether it be certain habits, whatever else, I think this is less partisan in real life than it's sometimes portrayed. And I'll just kind of leave that. Chili Vic says, I mentioned Hayes Fawcett a moment ago that he works for LSU now, but he also attends LSU. That's kind of cool. Good for him, young guy like that. It's funny. I asked a young guy this year or so ago. Actually, maybe it was Connor who I asked. I said, when I was a kid growing up, if I said, hey, what's your dream job? My dream job would be very similar to what I'm doing now. And I didn't know what podcasts were. I didn't know what streaming video was years ago. But the idea of almost being like a radio host, sitting in front of a microphone, talking to a microphone like this, that would have been my dream job. And I said, for young kids in their 20s today, even a little younger than maybe Connor is, or younger than even mid-20s guys who are still in college, I said, what's the dream job media-wise for people of that age? Because I honestly don't know. I'm far enough removed from that now. And he said it really was likely social media related. People want to run team accounts. There's all these like cutesy, voices that the various, sport teams' Twitter accounts have kind of developed, and people want to be the ones producing that content, or in this case, the one producing the social media edits. That really has become kind of a young person's dream job in sports in a way that probably my generation, I'm 43, my generation doesn't really understand that. That's not a dream job for me. I, tweet every now and then, but it's not the kind of thing where I would just want to sit around and tweet all day long. That would be boring for me. But, for some people, that really is truly a dream job. And obviously a guy like that seemingly is on his way to doing that. Let me get a couple more here. Silent Chaos says the players are safer in Athens than the cities where they come from. They are world-class cleaning staff, working around the clock, medical staff, nutritionists. They are safer on campus. I think there's a very good chance that's probably true. Here's the other thing. And like I said, I'm totally allergic to the politics of all of this. We got to keep that out of there. But, I live in a fairly, I guess, like I know a lot of people from various like backgrounds, right? Political affiliation, whatever else. I just know a lot of different kind of people. And yet, in real life, talking to those people, like I hear a lot of the same things. Like if you watch like cable TV, they'll make it seem like it's red team versus blue team, and the red team does everything the same, and the blue team does everything the same, and that's the story of the coronavirus. The honest truth is, in real life, I don't think it's quite as starkly drawn as that. I just don't. Because one of the things that I'm hearing from a lot of my just various people I have in my life is, and these are people from all kinds of different backgrounds, all kind of different, walks of life, whatever else, is the people who are older than me who have high school kids, a lot of them express some frustration about managing their high school kids' behavior during this time, especially the ones that are old enough to drive. Because you're going to go back to like sort of the deep lockdown of like late March, early April, high school kids did not want to do it. And a lot of the people I know who are parents of those age kids, it was just really, really hard, especially when maybe not everyone in their friend group, parents were kind of behaving the same way. And, that's not ideological. That's not, how you vote doesn't determine how you behave or something like that. Everybody cared about their kids. Everybody wanted, healthy outcomes for, for their families. But convincing young people to take it seriously is not easy, no matter what your political affiliation is, what kind of background you have there. And I think similar type of things play out with all of this all the way around. That the ultimate confrontation with the virus is not determined by what you do at the ballot box as much as it is all of us more similar than different there in that regard. Yes, you see the inflated hyper partisanship sometimes reflected on cable news, but in reality, I don't think that's really the lion's share of the way that our society has dealt with coronavirus. And that's really all I'm going to say about it. All right, let me get a couple over on Facebook. Kevin Chapman says Hines Ward on DawgNation Daily would rock. Yeah, we've been really close to having Hines on the show a couple of times. I don't know that actually we had Hines on the show a couple of years ago. We did have him on the show a couple of years ago. Probably haven't had him since then. Maybe we could do that again. Randy Hall says, any update on the fan of the month in the show? I can take Eddie's speaking parts. So how about this as a way of updating that? So here's a little bit of an idea about the way the next few days are going to work. So coming up on Friday, it's July 3rd. We're going to take July 3rd off, and in observance of our nation's birthday on July 4th. So we're going to do that in honor of Independence Day. But also on Monday, we're going to be doing a pre-recorded show on Monday. We're not going to pass it off as a live show. It's going to be a show, but it's going to be pre-recorded. We've never done this for video before. But we are going to try to do this on Monday. Here's the idea that I had. I haven't cleared this with anybody yet, but it's kind of the idea that I've had. How would y'all feel about, since there can be no comments, you can't comment on a show that's not live, or at least I can't interact with them. Y'all can comment yourself, but you can't comment live. How would you feel about trying to do some phone calls, like a radio show, old school AM radio phone calls? How would you guys feel about that? So this is what I'm kind of thinking of. Would you participate? Now, it'll be one of those things of, we'll have to say on social media when it's happening. We'll have to give you the number to call. And then you'll call in, talk as if it were, a regular call-in show. We'd have to kind of, do a couple of minutes worth to keep it moving. Nobody can stay on the air too long because we got other calls we would want to take. But how would you guys feel about that? We may try that. Desmond Lee mentioning Brock Vandegrift at the Elite 11 this week. That's going to be a fun thing to watch out for. Sam Hazeltine about fans in the stands. Georgia has said they'll make their announcement on this in August. I think waiting is probably good news all the way around. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that some of the news of the last couple of days doesn't put a little bit of a dampener on what I hoped was more fans than not, 50% or above. The news the last couple of days, I think, puts that in jeopardy a little bit. But there's also, a long time between, now you got a whole month of July to watch things play out. Kyle Norton says, where do you expect Mims to commit to? I guess I feel pretty good about Georgia on this front for Mims, I guess. I guess I'd be surprised if Mims didn't choose Georgia. That's one of the elite recruits right now that it seems like I probably feel, whatever. Jerry Popham says, I'd rather not change BA. I like it the way that it is. So when I say taking phone calls, I don't mean every day. I mean just for Monday. It'd be a one-time thing. Matthew McGahee says we need Bill Goldberg on the show. That'd be a good guy to get on for sure. I'd love to do that. Sam says coming down to Macon. Yeah, last year we started doing some of our summer, tour type stuff. We want to do more of that. Obviously this year it's kind of tricky on that front. But I'd love to be down there in Macon sometime. Love to be in Macon. Desmond Lee, by the way, likes Corey Foreman to be a dog. Monty Moon says call-ins are almost all cringy. So y'all are a little more down on that. I mean, typically speaking, I'm not a fan of the call-in format on a regular basis. I thought it might be fun to do a little while. Y'all are kind of down on that. I'm a little surprised at that. A little surprised. Al Chandler says Vandegrift's getting a lot of airtime on local TV. Good to see that. Randy Hall says Buck Bellew on the show. Yeah, we've had Buck on a few times. I think we're definitely going to have Buck on in a few days. He doesn't know that yet, but I'm going to try to get him on the show. Matt Rukavina says, don't forget Helen, Georgia. I love Helen. Alpine Village of Helen. Love to be that. Al Chandler says Champ Bailey. We had Champ on a couple years ago. A lot of these guys we need to go back to. By the way, even on YouTube, the call-in's not super popular. James Wade says call-ins can get awkward. Very surprised. Very surprised. Ace Dog's battery's getting low. Ace Dog, thanks for being with us here today. Appreciate that. New Jack says, talk about JT versus Jamie. Yeah, if JT Daniels is eligible, I still think Jamie Newman wins the starting job. That's my prediction on that. Philip Thomas does think that call-ins would be great, so that's good to be able to hear. Noah Sheldon predicts that James Williams will be a dog. I guess I feel pretty good about that, although admittedly I probably thought he would have already committed by now. It's late. We got to do a couple more and get out of here. Let's let's see what else is going on. Bill Rogers says, how about a Dog Nation invasion in October for Florida? Boy, I hope so. Sam Hazeltine says, may I come to the studio? Right now, no one's in the studio but me. Maybe one of these days we'll have some openness for the studio. Give some opportunity for that. Eric Herbst thinks that Foreman's staying on the West Coast. I wonder about that. Seems like the door could be open to getting him away from there. Randy Hall said, let's give Dan Mullen a call. That would be very interesting to have Dan Mullen on the show. Something tells me he wouldn't be too interested in that. Michael Webb, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Gerald Harmon says, yeah, the YouTube callers would be awkward. Yeah, maybe we should have like a YouTube versus Facebook family feud at some point in time. John Benton says, all calls need to pay tribute to Eddie. That's always a good idea for me. Michael Webb says, how about a monthly dog legend thing like Herschel or Garrison Hurst, etc.? That'd be great. We had Herschel last July. That was really fun. Garrison Hurst, I don't think we've ever had on the show before. I'd love to have Garrison Hurst. Love that. All right, we got to get ready to go for today. Anybody else got anything they want to say before we do? We appreciate all of you, of course. Laura Woodard says, just want to see them in pads. Been too long. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Been too long on that front. Al Chandler says, need to have Matthew Stafford on, highlight his career. Matthew Stafford's a guy I'd love to have on. We haven't done that either. Muhammad Maskwal we've had on. Muhammad's a great guy. Great guy. Very, very good storyteller. Just a really sharp guy all the way around. All right. Couple of other things. I guess we're done here for today. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Check them out online, rsandrews.com. Water heater goes out. In many cases, they can replace it for you the same day. That's always good news. You can find it online at rsandrews.com. Let us also remind you of this. Make sure you check out the AJC for your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Interesting news, but maybe new stimulus coming in. So somebody could be getting a check in the mail. Find that out at ajc.com. If you got kids, Center for Puppetry Arts in the Atlanta area, one of the great ways to entertain your kids. It could be on its way back in July. Find out some more information about that. And what do sports look like as they continue to make their announcements for returning? Michael Cunningham's got an interesting column on that. You can find it online at ajc.com. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Have a great day. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And, of course, DawgNation Daily presented by Pella Window and Door. I'll talk to you back here tomorrow morning, once again at 10 a.m.